Imagine if your government believed that the human mind could see across oceans, penetrate enemy secrets, and spy on hidden military bases thousands of miles away without ever leaving a room. It sounds like science fiction. But for over 2 decades, the United States military and the Central Intelligence Agency poured millions of dollars into exactly this, psychic warfare. It was called the Stargate Project, a classified program where psychics, or so-called remote viewers, were trained to extend their consciousness beyond the limits of space and time. This is not a Hollywood movie. This is declassified history. Today we open the files of Project Stargate. You will learn how fears of Soviet psychic research led the CIA and the Pentagon into the strange world of parapsychology. You will hear about experiments where psychics claim to describe secret Soviet facilities, nuclear weapons, even alien landscapes, without ever setting foot there. Some call it groundbreaking science. Others call it Cold War madness. What is certain is that for more than 20 years, America's most secret intelligence agencies gambled on the impossible. The story begins in the early 1950s. The Cold War is escalating. The United States and the Soviet Union are locked in a battle for global dominance. Nuclear weapons are only part of the equation. Both sides are desperate for any edge. Reports begin to surface that the Soviet Union is investing heavily in parapsychology, the study of psychic phenomena. Soviet scientists are rumored to be exploring telepathy, psychokinesis, and remote viewing. Some US intelligence officers even claim the Soviets have trained psychic assassins. Whether these reports were exaggerated or real didn't matter. What mattered was the fear. If the Soviets were studying psychic warfare, the US could not afford to fall behind. In 1952, the CIA created the Office of Scientific Intelligence to monitor unusual fields of research. By the 1960s, parapsychology was firmly on their radar. Meanwhile, civilian researchers in the United States, from Duke University to private labs, were quietly experimenting with extrasensory perception. Though results were inconsistent, the possibility that the human mind could perceive beyond its senses intrigued some scientists and terrified the intelligence community. By the late 1960s, rumors reached Washington that Soviet laboratories had invested millions of rubles into psychic research. There were whispers of experiments in Leningrad and Moscow where gifted psychics could move objects with their minds or transmit thoughts across long distances. Was it propaganda? Was it real? In the high-stakes climate of the Cold War, the US could not afford to take chances. In 1972, the US military authorized small-scale funding to investigate psychic phenomena. But the real breakthrough came when the Central Intelligence Agency turned to the Stanford Research Institute, or SRI, in California. 2 physicists, Harold Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, were tasked with designing controlled experiments. Their mission? Test whether remote viewing could be real and whether it could be used for intelligence gathering. Puthoff and Targ recruited psychics, artists, and ordinary people said to have unusual abilities. They set up experiments in shielded rooms, sometimes even underground chambers, to eliminate the possibility of cheating. In one of their earliest tests, a subject named Ingo Swann was asked to describe objects hidden in sealed boxes. His accuracy startled the researchers. He claimed not only to sense the shapes, but also details like color and texture. Encouraged, they pushed further. Could he describe distant locations he had never seen? This was the birth of remote viewing. The idea that a trained individual could project their consciousness to a target location, anywhere on Earth, and report back details of what they saw. Unlike traditional clairvoyance, remote viewing was structured. Sessions were conducted with strict protocols. Viewers were given coordinates or random number sequences and asked to sketch or describe what they perceived. The results were sometimes uncanny. In controlled experiments, viewers described buildings, landscapes, and objects with surprising detail. Not every session was accurate, but when correct descriptions lined up with verifiable targets, the CIA took notice. In a world where spy satellites and reconnaissance planes risked exposure, the idea of using the human mind as a surveillance tool was irresistible. By the mid-1970s, Project Stargate's foundations were set. The United States now believed or at least feared, that psychic phenomena could play a role in intelligence gathering. The logic was simple. If there was even a small chance the mind could access hidden information, It had to be explored, because what if the Soviets cracked the code first? Millions of taxpayer dollars began flowing into secret accounts. What started as a fringe experiment at the Stanford Research Institute was about to become one of the strangest intelligence programs in history. This is how it began, with fear, with rumor, and with the belief that the human mind might be the next battlefield. But this was only the beginning. In the next part, we'll explore the early experiments in detail, the strange visions, the shocking successes, and the failures that pushed the CIA deeper into the unknown. Stay with us, because what comes next will blur the line between science, espionage, and the supernatural. When the Central Intelligence Agency gave the green light in 1972, the Stanford Research Institute became the unlikely headquarters of America's psychic spy program. Here, behind the ordinary walls of a research center in Menlo Park, California, physicists Harold Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ set out to test what most scientists dismissed as fantasy. Their task was simple in words, but extraordinary in scope. Can the human mind perceive beyond its senses? Can thoughts alone reach across time and space? To answer, they built experiments that would become the foundation of the remote viewing program. Puthoff and Targ knew they needed people with unusual mental abilities. One of their first recruits was Ingo Swann, an artist from New York who had long claimed psychic sensitivity. Swann wasn't interested in vague fortune-telling. He wanted structure, repeatability, and proof. In their first experiments, Swann was asked to describe hidden objects sealed inside opaque envelopes or locked containers. Sometimes he was eerily accurate, sketching the shape of a miniature model or describing the color of an object he could not possibly see. But soon the team pushed the limits. What if Swann could describe not just hidden objects but distant locations? What if his mind could travel thousands of miles? In 1973, Swann was given geographical coordinates, just numbers on a page with no context. He sat quietly, pen in hand, and began to describe what he saw in his mind. To the surprise of the researchers, his sketches matched landmarks at the target location. At times, he included small details, the orientation of a building, the curve of a road, that could be later confirmed. This process was called coordinate remote viewing. The subject was not told where to focus. Instead, a set of random numbers linked to a specific target served as the cue. The idea was that consciousness itself could lock on to the location. If true, this meant geography and distance no longer mattered. A person could describe a hidden base in the Soviet Union while sitting in a California office. Not long after, the program attracted military interest. The US Army's intelligence branch saw potential value. What if psychic perception could help locate hostages? Nuclear sites? Secret weapons? Enter Joseph McMoneagle, a decorated Army officer who would later become one of the most famous remote viewers in the world. McMoneagle described the experience as entering a dreamlike state, letting impressions and images drift into his mind, and sketching them before logic could interfere. In one test, he described a massive crane and the construction of a new submarine pen at a Soviet naval base. Months later, spy satellite photos confirmed the existence of the structure almost exactly as McMoneagle had described. For the CIA, this was more than coincidence. It was potential intelligence. While mainstream science largely dismissed psychic phenomena, the intelligence community operated under different rules. They didn't need proof that would satisfy academic journals. They needed results that could give them an edge, even if those results came from the margins of science. The Cold War demanded risk. Billions were being spent on nuclear weapons, stealth aircraft, and surveillance satellites. Compared to that, a few $1 million for psychic research seemed like a small gamble. And if the Soviets were truly ahead in this field, the United States could not afford to fall behind. By the mid-1970s, remote viewing sessions had a recognizable pattern. Tasking. The viewer was assigned a target. Sometimes it was a set of coordinates. Other times a sealed envelope or random number linked to a location or object. Session, the viewer entered a relaxed state, often with pen and paper, sketching impressions as they came. Shapes, textures, feelings, even sounds were recorded. Analysis, a third party compared the sketches and notes with the actual target. Accuracy varied. Some sessions produced vague or useless impressions. Others were startlingly detailed. One remote viewer described the interior of a Soviet facility, including a large gantry crane, unusual machinery, and the movement of personnel. Intelligence analysts compared this to satellite photographs and found striking similarities. Not everyone was convinced. Within the CIA, opinions were divided. Some officers believed remote viewing was a dangerous distraction, pulling resources from proven methods. Others were cautiously optimistic, arguing that even a small success rate justified the investment. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ tried to control for bias. Sessions were double-blind, meaning neither the viewer nor the monitor knew the target in advance. This reduced the chance of accidental clues. Still, critics pointed out that misses were frequent, and hits could be explained as coincidence or lucky guesses. Yet, for those who had witnessed the most accurate sessions, coincidence seemed harder to believe. One of the strangest early cases came in 1973 when Ingo Swann was asked to describe the planet Jupiter. At the time, no spacecraft had yet flown past the gas giant. Swann described features such as colored bands in the atmosphere, strong magnetic fields, and even the possibility of thin rings around the planet. Years later, when the Pioneer 10 spacecraft sent back data, some of Swann's descriptions appeared to align with discoveries, including the existence of Jupiter's magnetic field and faint rings. Skeptics dismissed this as educated guesswork, but to the believers, it was evidence that remote viewing could reach beyond Earth itself. Another remarkable figure was Pat Price, a former police officer who became one of the program's most celebrated remote viewers. Price had a knack for describing Soviet installations with uncanny accuracy. In one session, he sketched a large crane and unusual buildings at a Soviet site in the Ural Mountains. Later satellite photos showed a close match. Price also described files stored in a cabinet at the facility, even naming some of the individuals connected to the project. Whether this was psychic vision, coincidence, or a clever use of intuition remains debated to this day, but his reports were compelling enough that C.I.A. analysts circulated them alongside conventional intelligence. As stories of these successes spread within classified channels, the reputation of the Stanford Research Institute grew. By the late 1970s, their work had expanded under different code names: Grill Flame, Center Lane, Sunstreak, before eventually consolidating under the name Stargate Project. The Army's intelligence branch, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the CIA all became stakeholders. Funding increased, more viewers were recruited, and the experiments moved from laboratory curiosities to real intelligence operations. For a moment, it seemed the impossible had become part of America's arsenal. This was the rise of the remote viewers, ordinary people trained to see the extraordinary. From hidden Soviet submarine bases to the secrets of distant planets, their visions blurred the line between science and science fiction. But the deeper the program went, the more complicated the results became. Were psychic spies truly a breakthrough in intelligence gathering? Or were America's agencies being fooled by coincidence, confirmation bias, and wishful thinking? In Part 3, we'll enter the heart of the Stargate Project, classified missions, Cold War rivalries, and the psychic race that pushed intelligence into the unknown. The 1980s were the high-water mark of America's psychic espionage program. By now, the idea had evolved from lab experiments at Stanford Research Institute into operational missions. The CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the Army's intelligence branches all wanted answers. Could remote viewing provide real, actionable intelligence against America's enemies? The Cold War demanded boldness. Across the ocean, the Soviet Union was building new weapons, hiding submarines beneath the Arctic ice, and expanding its nuclear arsenal. Satellites could see much, spies could steal more, but there were always gaps. And it was into those shadows that the Stargate Project stepped. One of the most celebrated cases came when a remote viewer was asked to describe activity at the Soviet naval base of Severodvinsk. With no prior knowledge of the site, the viewer began sketching an enormous crane, vast construction halls, and a submarine unlike anything seen before. Weeks later, satellite images confirmed the Soviets were indeed building a new class of nuclear submarine. For military planners in Washington, the details provided by the remote viewer matched far too closely to be ignored. This success gave the program credibility, at least within certain classified circles. If remote viewers could describe the construction of top-secret enemy weapons, Perhaps they had a genuine role to play in America's defense. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution shook the world. Dozens of American hostages were taken at the US Embassy in Tehran. Desperate for information, intelligence agencies turned to remote viewing. Viewers were tasked with describing the conditions of the hostages and the layout of the embassy. Some sketches showed rooms, guards, even the psychological state of those imprisoned. Reports later suggested that some details matched accounts given by released hostages. Skeptics argued the information was too vague to be useful, but supporters claimed the sessions provided confirmation when little else was available. It was a glimpse into the program's potential and its limits. The Americans weren't alone. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, the Soviet Union also poured resources into parapsychology and psychic warfare. Declassified reports reveal Soviet labs studying telepathy, psychokinesis, and remote influence on biological systems. Rumors spread of KGB experiments, where psychics attempted to disable electronic equipment, influence human behavior, or read documents sealed inside safes. Whether or not these experiments worked, the fact that Moscow funded them convinced Washington that the psychic battlefield was real. The Cold War was no longer just about missiles and spies. It was also a war of the mind. In one mission, a remote viewer was asked to target a location inside the Soviet Union with nothing more than a set of coordinates. The sketches he produced showed a sprawling building with domes and towers. The viewer described ornate architecture and large conference rooms. When analysts compared his sketches to photographs of the Kremlin, the similarities were striking. Was this psychic espionage, or simply cultural imagination filling the gaps? After all, anyone familiar with Russia could picture onion domes and long conference halls. Still, the session was logged and the data added to the program's growing archive of missions. One of the most dramatic cases came from remote viewer Pat Price, the former police officer with an uncanny gift. Tasked with describing a Soviet site deep in the Ural Mountains, Price produced sketches of a massive secret facility. He reported giant gantry cranes, underground levels, and unusual machinery. He even gave names of personnel working there. When spy satellites later imaged the site, analysts were stunned to see details that aligned with Price's description. Some in the intelligence community whispered that Price's reports had outpaced even the National Reconnaissance Office. But tragedy struck. Not long after, Pat Price died suddenly under mysterious circumstances. To this day, conspiracy theories surround his death, some suggesting foreign agents, others pointing to the dangerous politics of psychic espionage. What is certain is that Price's work remains one of the most famous examples in the history of the Stargate Project. Again and again, remote viewers were tasked with the same impossible challenge: describe where no spy could go. Secret chemical weapons labs, underground missile silos, research centers hidden behind the Iron Curtain. Sometimes the sessions produced only foggy images, metaphors, or useless impressions. But sometimes they produced details that shocked even hardened analysts. One viewer described a facility with high towers, long tunnels, and unusual equipment. Weeks later, overhead reconnaissance confirmed a new radar installation at the exact location. The Stargate Project wasn't limited to military targets. It was also asked to find missing persons and hostages. In one case, remote viewers attempted to locate a kidnapped American general in Europe. The descriptions they gave of his surroundings, a farmhouse, nearby mountains, the presence of armed guards, were later judged as partially accurate. Another mission involved tracking down a missing plane in Africa. Again, the results were mixed, but some details matched the recovery site. For believers, these missions proved the utility of psychic spies. For skeptics, they highlighted the vagueness and ambiguity that made the data difficult to act upon. Inside the intelligence community, the Stargate Project was both a fascination and an embarrassment. Supporters pointed to the accurate hits, claiming they justified continued funding. Critics pointed to the frequent misses, arguing the project wasted taxpayer money on pseudoscience. One CIA officer famously said, "If I can't take it to the president, it's not intelligence." And psychic sketches, no matter how detailed, were difficult to present in a White House briefing. Over the years, the program shifted under multiple code names: Gondola Wish, Grill Flame, Center Lane, Sunstreak, And finally, Stargate Project. Each new name reflected reorganizations, funding changes, and battles between agencies. But the core remained the same, a small group of remote viewers sitting quietly in rooms trying to see across the globe with only their minds. Joseph McMoneagle, one of the most prolific remote viewers, once described a new class of Soviet submarine. He sketched its unusual design, including large missile tubes, at a time when no Western analyst had seen such details. Months later, when reconnaissance satellites confirmed the construction of the massive Typhoon submarine, McMoneagle's report was hailed as a breakthrough. For McMoneagle, it was proof that remote viewing worked. For skeptics, it was just another lucky guess. But within the Stargate program, his credibility grew. He would go on to complete hundreds of sessions, earning the nickname Remote Viewer Number 1. Through the 1980s, the Stargate Project remained deeply classified, but whispers of psychic spies occasionally leaked into the press, fueling rumors of men who stare at goats, telepathic experiments, and military psychics. Most Americans laughed it off as science fiction. Few knew the reality, that the US government had indeed funded psychics for intelligence purposes, and sometimes their visions seemed to work. This was the operational phase of the Stargate Project, when psychic spies were unleashed on the battlefield of the Cold War. They claimed to see submarines under the Arctic, described secret Soviet facilities, and even sensed the plight of hostages half a world away. But as the 1990s approached, the political winds shifted. The Cold War was ending, budgets were shrinking, and the question loomed larger than ever. Was remote viewing truly a weapon of intelligence? Or was America's most secret program chasing shadows? In Part 4, we'll enter the final chapter, the decline of Stargate, the declassification, and the legacy of psychic spies that refuses to die. By the late 1980s, the world was changing. The Cold War, the engine that had fueled decades of espionage, paranoia, and secret projects, was beginning to wind down. And with it, the Stargate Project faced a reckoning. For nearly 2 decades, psychics had been sketching Soviet submarines, describing underground bases, and hunting for hostages. But for every impressive hit, there were just as many misses. Supporters said the misses were the price of exploring new frontiers. Critics said they were proof the entire enterprise was a waste of time. Inside the halls of Langley, the patience for psychic espionage began to run thin. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 symbolized the end of the Cold War. The Soviet Union collapsed soon after. The enemy that had justified psychic spying was gone. Now, intelligence agencies faced a different reality: shrinking budgets, congressional oversight, and an American public that demanded transparency. In this climate, an experimental program with questionable results became hard to defend. Even inside the intelligence community, many officers openly mocked the project. To them, Stargate was a relic of an era when fear of Soviet superiority had justified anything. By 1987, the Central Intelligence Agency formally cut its ties to the program. They handed responsibility over to the Defense Intelligence Agency. Under new leadership, the project continued, smaller, quieter, and more desperate to prove its worth. But the CIA's withdrawal was a warning sign. Without the backing of America's premier intelligence agency, Stargate became a program adrift. The Defense Intelligence Agency still saw potential uses. Remote viewers were occasionally tasked with locating drug lords in Latin America or tracking terrorists. But success was inconsistent, and skeptics grew louder. During the Gulf War in 1991, remote viewers were asked to provide intelligence on Saddam Hussein's bunkers and hidden facilities. Some reports claimed partial accuracy. Others were dismissed as too vague to be useful. The very ambiguity of remote viewing, impressions, metaphors, sketches of shapes and feelings, made it nearly impossible to turn into actionable intelligence. Military commanders wanted coordinates. They wanted certainty. Remote viewers rarely provided either. By the mid-1990s, Stargate had become less a weapon of espionage and more a curiosity hidden in classified files. In 1995, the end came. The CIA commissioned an outside evaluation from the American Institutes for Research, AIR, a respected scientific think tank. The question was simple: did remote viewing work? After analyzing decades of experiments and operational missions, the AIR report concluded that while some results were interesting, they were not reliable enough for intelligence use. In plain terms, remote viewing could not consistently provide information better than chance. For the CIA, that was the final nail in the coffin. The Stargate Project was officially shut down. When the program was terminated, the CIA also moved to declassify its history. In 1995, thousands of pages of documents were released to the public. For the first time, ordinary citizens could read transcripts of remote viewing sessions, sketches of Soviet submarines, descriptions of secret bases, notes on hostages, missing aircraft, even glimpses of faraway planets. The revelation stunned many. The US government had indeed spent millions of dollars on psychic spies, not as a rumor, not as a hoax, but as an official program stretching across decades. Some laughed, others were outraged. But for a smaller group, the declassified files were vindication, proof that the government took psychic phenomena seriously, even if science refused to. Even after its closure, the Stargate Project refused to fade quietly into history. Joseph McMoneagle continued to practice remote viewing, writing books and claiming ongoing successes in the civilian world. Ingo Swann, the artist who helped design the protocols, became a legendary figure in parapsychology circles. Former project members spoke at conferences, gave interviews, and argued that the program had been shut down not because it failed, but because it worked too well, or because it embarrassed the intelligence community. Conspiracy theories blossomed. Some claimed psychic research never really stopped, but went deeper underground. Others argued that elements of Stargate were absorbed into black projects still hidden from public view. Mainstream science, however, remained unmoved. For psychologists, physicists, and neuroscientists, the evidence for psychic functioning was too thin, too inconsistent, and too easily explained by chance or flawed methodology. They argued that human beings are experts at finding patterns, or even when none exist. A remote viewer might describe a large building near water. Intelligence analysts, searching desperately for meaning, could find a match almost anywhere. To skeptics, Stargate was not proof of psychic powers. It was proof of how far governments will go when fear clouds judgment. Yet, in the cultural imagination, Stargate became immortal. Books, documentaries, and Hollywood films drew inspiration from the idea of psychic soldiers and secret mind wars. The 2009 film The Men Who Stare at Goats, though satirical, was rooted in real experiments conducted under the larger umbrella of psychic research. Television shows featured psychic detectives, remote viewers, and secret government programs, blurring fact and fiction until they became one. Even today, internet forums and YouTube channels dissect declassified Stargate files, debating whether they reveal truth, deception, or something in between. In the end, the Stargate Project leaves us with questions that are larger than espionage. Can human consciousness reach beyond the limits of the body? Is the mind capable of perceiving across space and time? Or are these visions nothing more than illusions, the tricks of imagination dressed up as intelligence? The government may have closed the file, scientists may have dismissed the data, but the fascination remains, because if even one remote viewing session was truly accurate, it suggests a reality far stranger than we imagine, and that possibility keeps the legend of Stargate alive. The Stargate Project began as a response to fear, the fear that the Soviets were unlocking secrets of the human mind. It grew into one of the strangest programs in the history of intelligence. Psychic spies searching the world not with satellites or surveillance, but with thought alone. For some, it was a bold exploration of human potential. For others, it was a costly mistake, a symbol of paranoia gone too far. But whether success or failure, the Stargate Project proves one thing. In the shadowy world of intelligence, no frontier is too strange, no possibility too wild. When the stakes are survival, the documents are public, the witnesses have spoken. Now the question is yours to answer. Do you believe